Silk Road, the biggest online black market for all kinds of illegal stuff. We're talking body parts, weapons, hitmen, and most importantly, drugs. Silk Road was like the Amazon of drugs. You could literally order whatever substance you wanted with just a few clicks and it would show up at your doorstep like a freaking Amazon package. But here's the kicker. The mastermind behind this whole illegal empire wasn't some shady gangster or a hardened criminal. No, it was Ross Albrecht, a dude who grew up in a loving family in Texas, was a Boy Scout, and studied physics at university. This guy was a sweetheart according to his friends and family, but he was responsible for over $1.2 billion worth of illegal goods and services. And get this, he supposedly paid hitmen to kill his enemies. Or did he? There's still debate about whether Ross is guilty or not. So, in this video, we're gonna dive into the murky world of the dark web and explore the true story behind the infamous Silk Road marketplace. We'll also look at how the government was able to track down Ross even though he was using the Tor browser to stay anonymous. I mean, how do you find someone who can't be traced? This is a true story filled with mysteries, twists, and even some corrupt government agents. Buckle up, cause this is the fascinating story of the Silk Road Empire. Ross Albrecht grew up in Austin, Texas in the late 80s and 90s. His father taught him how to think through every side of an argument, and his mother gave up her dream of becoming a journalist to bet everything on her golden son becoming successful. Ross's story really begins when he went to college at Penn State. Like most people who end up changing the world, or at least try to, he was a very smart and equally eccentric guy. He was an extreme minimalist, not caring about material possessions, wearing hand-me-down clothes, and living in a basement. That kind of thing. That's where he met his long-term girlfriend, Julia Bay, who always said how cheap he was. One night, Julia noticed a bunch of bucks near his bed and asked what they were. He explained that he was a part of the College Libertarians Club, a group that discussed libertarian philosophy, economics, and politics. When Julia asked what libertarianism is, he explained that everything from what you do with your life to what you put in your body should be up to the individual, not the government. Ross became obsessed with libertarianism. He would tell his ideas to anyone that would listen. He would travel around the country to attend libertarian conferences. He had an answer to every possible political argument and objection. In a one-school debate, Ross argued that all drugs should be legalized. Not only is it not the government's right to tell people what they can and can't put in their bodies, but legalizing drugs will actually make society safer. How can you legalize something that kills tens of thousands of people a year? Republican and Democrat students argued. Ross counters, should we outlaw Big Macs from McDonald's too because people gain weight and have heart attacks and die as a result of them? Should we outlaw cars because people get into car accidents and die? There are no gang wars over the sale of alcohol or Big Macs because those are legal. Millions of lives are ruined, most of the time over harmless drugs, thrown into the prison industrial complex, all because the government wanted to tell people what they can and can't do with their bodies. Needless to say, Ross won that debate. The only problem was that theoretical debates were great and all, but what would he actually do with his life that would align with his libertarian beliefs, make him a boatload of money, and make his parents proud of him at the same time? So, he dropped out of college, moved back to Austin with his girlfriend, and started his hunt for that golden opportunity. Ross Albrecht wanted to change the world, but his life so far had been a series of almosts. He tried several business ideas, but never quite got anywhere with them, and he was starting to feel like his life was passing him by. However, there was one business idea Ross kept coming back to, an online marketplace where people could buy or sell anything imaginable with no limits or restrictions. After some research, Ross discovered there was a web browser called Tor, which allowed you to access the dark web, where you couldn't be tracked or traced. The Tor browser was actually developed by the US Navy as a way to communicate privately over the internet by concealing a user's real IP address and identity. By using this, Ross realized people would be able to buy things online without the government being able to see what they were doing. But at first, Ross didn't go any further with the idea because there was no way to accept payments online that couldn't easily be traced. For example, credit cards would keep a log of every transaction someone made and be linked to their bank accounts. So for a little while, the site remained just an idea in Ross's mind. Until the summer of 2010 when Ross came across a new technology called Bitcoin. a digital currency which could be transferred anonymously, thus allowing people to buy whatever they wanted without a trace. It was exactly what he needed. So from his bedroom, Ross began working on his new online marketplace. He decided to call it Silk Road, named after a famous trade route that started over 2,000 years ago that people used for centuries to carry all kinds of different goods. Understandably, Ross was very wary of anyone knowing about the site he was building, which unfortunately meant he had to build it all by himself. The only person he told at first was his girlfriend, Julia. Now his girlfriend was a little concerned, but Ross reassured her that thanks to the Tor web browser and Bitcoin, it would all be completely anonymous. As for making the site itself, it was slow work to figure everything out, as building an entire online marketplace by himself was a massive job. But Ross was determined, and he worked very long hours to make it a reality. He sat at his laptop coding all day and most of the nights. He would just occasionally take a break to watch one of his favorite shows, Breaking Bad, the story of a normal guy who becomes a drug kingpin. However, as Ross was finally nearing completion of the Silk Road site, he realized he had a problem. He needed some product to actually sell on his new marketplace. There was no use building the platform if when people first came there was nothing to buy. So Ross rented out a building in the middle of nowhere and began growing his own magic mushrooms using a book that was essentially a dummy's guide to building your own mushroom farm. This would be the first product to ever be sold. Ross started working on the Silk Road, and today, it was finally time for opening day. By now, Ross had essentially done the work of a 12-person startup. He was the front-end developer, back-end developer, database expert, Tor expert, Bitcoin expert, CEO, investor, and so on. Some estimates say it would have cost at least around $1 million of funding to replicate the site, and he still didn't know if anyone wanted to use it. But he felt that, in some strange cosmic way, this site was why he was here, to free people from the tyranny of an oppressive government. He double-checked everything from the product inventory to the database and server, and boom, the Silk Road was live. And here's how it works. First, you download the Tor browser, then you type in this URL in the Tor browser, and then the website with the iconic green comma logo appeared. From there, you can navigate to your favorite product categories. The only product listed was mushrooms, and then you bought some Bitcoin just like you would buy tokens at an arcade. Ross had written some instructions on Silk Road's blog about how to do that, and then you would buy. The package would be shipped to your doorstep, and afterward, you would leave a review to keep the marketplace healthy and drive out bad sellers. To get people to know about the site, Ross had a simple marketing strategy. At exactly 4:20 p.m. on January 27th, Ross went on relevant forums and acted like a random person who just came across Silk Road and was recommending it to people. And it worked. People were already browsing the site in no time. After a few weeks, Ross was shipping out orders. Once or twice a week, he would vacuum seal the product and ship them off in padded envelopes. At this point, the Postal Service didn't have many resources. All the high-tech equipment to check for illegal stuff was reserved for big shipments, and sniffing dogs only came in a few times a month. And after a couple of months of business, he was now shipping out products daily, and he was no longer the only seller on the site. A few new sellers joined the ranks, selling harder, stronger products. This made his girlfriend worried because selling harder products could attract trouble compared to selling more harmless substances. But Ross became obsessed, and by March 2011, 2 months into business, Ross had already made a few $1,000s in revenue. Eventually, the site caught the attention of a journalist who wrote about internet culture named Adrian Chen. When he first heard about it, he thought for sure it had to be a hoax because who would be stupid enough to make a site like this? But then he went to the website and found out for himself. He saw exactly 343 different kinds of products available, all for street prices or less than street prices. He created an account named Adrian802. Then he posted on the forum asking if anyone wanted to be anonymously interviewed for the article. One guy, a software developer, said, "Buying products on the Silk Road kind of felt like I was in the future." Ross saw the journalist snooping around and figured that there was no way to stop him from writing the article. So he might as well use it as a way to get his libertarian message out there. So he gave the journalist this statement: "Stop funding the state with your tax dollars and direct your productive energies towards the black market." And at 4:20 p.m., June 1st, 2011, Adrian's article went live on Gawker, the underground website where you can buy any drug imaginable. The first paragraph read, "Making small talk where your pot dealer sucks, buying cocaine can get you shot. What if you could buy and sell drugs online like books or light bulbs? Now you can. Welcome to Silk Road." After the article was published, it went viral. Everyone was talking about it. Every news outlet was talking about it, and subsequently, traffic to the site exploded, and so did the price of Bitcoin. But just 4 days later, the Silk Road also caught the attention of the US government. Senator Chuck Schumer stood in front of a podium in front of national TV, and this is what he had to say. It's a certifiable one-stop shop for illegal drugs that represents the most brazen attempt to peddle drugs online that we have ever seen. It's more brazen than anything else by light years, and he called for the DOJ&D to shut down the site immediately. Ross had picked a fight with the biggest bully on earth, and they were about to fight back. Ross turned to his girlfriend and said, "They painted a bullseye on my back." The government would come to tremble at the thought of the Silk Road, not simply because it sold substances, but because it threatened their power. It threatened their control. They viewed it as a direct attack on the very fabric of America. Whoever was behind the Silk Road was using the internet built by the government, a browser built by the government, and the postal service built by the government to brazenly break the law right in front of their eyes. And there was nothing the government could do about it. In their eyes, America was under attack. But not with 747 seconds flying into buildings. It was being attacked in slow motion through a website that wanted to topple the country's democracy. The Silk Road wasn't just some traditional racket, it was a lucrative startup. And just like how Google started with search engines and now has branched out into things like self-driving cars, the problem with the Silk Road was also what it could be. It had to be stopped dead in its tracks before the movement caught on and became too powerful. Or, in other words, Ross Ulbricht was outshining the master. 8 months have gone by since Chuck Schumer called out the Silk Road, and the site has been booming like crazy. The media taunted the government for not taking it down yet. It was around this time that a key agent from the Department of Homeland Security joined the hunt. Leading up to this point, Ross had just been going by the name admin on the site, but he and his new anonymous business partner named Vijay came up with a new nickname for Ross, Dread Pirate Roberts from the movie The Princess Bride, and the Silk Road community ate it up. Before, Ross was just a faceless admin, but now he was a feared pirate taking on the US government. It was a rallying call for everyone involved. You weren't just slinging or buying product on the Silk Road. You are now part of a movement. The US government was devoting more resources to the search for Dread Pirate Roberts. However, considering multiple government agencies were working on the case of Silk Road, such as the FBI and the D, it might surprise you that the biggest breakthrough of all came from an IRS agent making a simple Google search. Gary Ford was a tax inspector who had been assigned to the Silk Road case to try and track some of the money being laundered. However, he had pretty much no knowledge of Bitcoin, Tor, or anything else to do with Silk Road. What Gary did have in his favor was that he was very detail-oriented and he read everything 3 times to make sure he never missed anything. Gary also liked to think outside the box. Gary started his search by asking, "What's the earliest post about Silk Road on the internet?" Since he figured whoever started the site would have had to drop off interest in the first place. So Gary went to Google, typed the Silk Road web address into the search box, and using advanced search, he filtered by dates, looking for results only from early 2011, which is when the Silk Road was rumored to have started. Only a few search results came up, and one of them was a post from a user called Altoid on a forum called The Shroomery. The post sounded more like a user, not the creator of the site, but it was the first record online of someone mentioning Silk Road. So Gary searched for other posts by a user called Altoid from around the same date, and stumbled across a post on another forum called Bitcoin Talk where someone with the same outward username had posted, "Has anyone seen Silk Road yet?" It's kind of like an anonymous Amazon.com. Gary thought it was interesting that the first mentions of Silk Road online were both coming from this same username. And this person had been promoting Silk Road on multiple different forums right around the time that Silk Road launched. So Gary looked through Altoid's post history on the forum. And a few months after Silk Road started, Altoid had made another post saying, "It pro needed for a Bitcoin startup." It was a job ad for a Bitcoin-related project, but inside the post, it read, "If interested, please send your answers to the following questions to rossalbrecht@gmail.com. Now when Gary told his colleagues about these findings, they dismissed that they said just because this user was the first one to publicly post about Silk Road didn't mean he was the creator. Which is true, they certainly needed more evidence to prove anything. But the more Gary looked into this Ross Ulbricht's character, the more convinced he became that this was the guy. First, by searching the name Ross Albrecht, Gary found Ross's YouTube channel containing videos about libertarianism along with a saved video about how to get away with stealing. Secondly, Gary found Ross's LinkedIn profile which had anti-government posts. Ross had written, "The most widespread and systematic use of force is amongst institutions and governments. So this is my current point of efforts. The best way to change the government is to change the minds of the governed. To that end, I'm creating an economic simulation to give people a first-hand experience of what it would be like to live in a world without the systematic use of force." Thirdly, they found a coding question related to Tor posted on Stack Overflow which had been posted by a user called Ross Albrecht. But within a minute of posting, he changed his username to Frosty instead. Gary couldn't shake the feeling that this was the guy they were looking for. So Gary asked a colleague who worked for the Department of Homeland Security to do a search on Ross Albrecht's name. And they found a recent incident on his file where he'd ordered fake IDs online that had been intercepted. When Ross had been questioned by an officer about this, he made a comment about how hypothetically anyone could go on a website called Silk Road and buy them. Why Ross said that is anyone's guess. Maybe he was trying to make the point that buying fake IDs wasn't that big of a deal these days, or maybe he just got overconfident that Silk Road could never be traced to him. But either way, Gary felt this whole thing was suspicious. Now, of course, all these different details still weren't conclusive evidence Ross Albrecht was the creator and owner of Silk Road. But here's the thing, other important details about the case hadn't been shared with Gary. To be honest, nobody expected this IRS agent would crack the case that other agencies had been working on for over 2 years, so they hadn't bothered to fill him in on recent developments. You see, whilst Gary had been doing this research, the FBI had managed to find out the IP address of the server Silk Road was hosted on. Using that IP address, they'd managed to find out the server was hosted in a data center in Iceland. And by working with the Icelandic authorities, the FBI were able to infiltrate the Silk Road server. Now, as for exactly how the government found the server's IP address in the first place, that's a bit of a controversial issue. Some believe the NSA had some involvement and used an illegal spying tactic that would have infringed on Ross's Fourth Amendment rights. However, the government denied this and said the way they were able to get access to the server was because of vulnerabilities in Silk Road's code, which leaked the server's IP address. This is definitely possible because, as we've already established, Silk Road's code had plenty of problems because of how quickly it had been developed by Ross, who'd initially been working on it all by himself. Either way, now that the FBI had tracked down the Silk Road server. Meanwhile, in Utah, corrupt D agent Carl Forst, also known as Knob, raided the home of Silk Road moderator Curtis Green. Green had an account with a lot of access, so the agent used his account to steal 350,000 bitcoins from DPR. Posing as the moderator he just arrested, DPR was put in a tough spot. On one hand, the amount of money stolen wasn't too much compared to how much money he was bringing in. But on the other hand, if he didn't retaliate against his moderator, it would show the community that you can steal from the boss without any repercussions. So, in just 8 words, DPR sanctioned the first murder for the Silk Road, and the same corrupt cop that just arrested that moderator pretended to accept that hit job for $40,000 up front, and another $40,000 after the hit was done. The agent Carl Forst was now a double agent and would go on to scam DPR for around $750,000 in total.
I'm playing both sides so that I always come out on top.
After all, why not? It was the opportunity of a lifetime since he had all the access, and Bitcoin was anonymous. For DPR, $100,000 here to get tipped off about the cops, and $500,000 there for an assassination was just the cost of doing business. Ross Albrecht was arrested exactly at 3:16 p.m. on October 1st, 2013, a day earlier than planned. At the time, he had been renting a room in San Francisco for $1,000 a month, which is strange to say the least for a future billionaire. That afternoon, he headed out and searched for better Wi-Fi and a change of scenery, never thinking that a team of FBI agents were circling his block. After finding most of his usual spots overcrowded, Ross headed for the Glen Park Library. Ross had been caught logged into the admin section of Silk Road, and in the corner of the computer was the name Frosty. Not just that, on his unlocked computer was a full diary about running Silk Road along with thousands of chat messages he sent while running the site, all of which could be used as evidence to convict him. And, to verify this story, newspapers and TV stations all around the world covered the story. The Boy Scout had been secretly running a website that trafficked an estimated $1.2 billion of drugs, weapons, poisons, and other illegal goods. His family was sure he'd been framed, or there'd been a mistake. Before his sentencing, Ross sent a letter to the judge, which said, "I've had my youth, and I know you must take away my middle years, but please leave me with my old age. Please leave a small light at the end of the tunnel, an excuse to stay healthy, an excuse to dream of better days ahead, and a chance to redeem myself in the free world before I meet my maker." However, the judge did not listen to this. Ross received 2 life sentences plus 40 years with no parole. In other words, Ross would spend the entire rest of his life in prison. Some felt this was overly harsh, but it seemed the judge wanted to make an example of him to try and deter other people from setting up similar marketplaces in the future. The judge also explained her decision by saying that she disagreed with Ross's philosophy that drug use only affects those who take the drugs. She said there are many other people who are hurt because of the dangerous substances sold on Silk Road. People die and lose loved ones, families are torn apart.